Welcome to Toffee TV. It is the press box, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Phil McNulty, who's the chief football writer for the BBC. Great to have you here, Phil.
Thank you.
You've been covering Merseyside football for a very, very long time. Obviously, you were at the Echo before you joined the BBC 22 years ago.
22 years ago, yeah. 23 coming up in the summer, yeah.
So you've seen a lot of changes, a lot going on. You said to me you covered your first Everton game in 1987.
That's right. It was on February the 14th, 1987 at the Manor Ground in Oxford, which is ironic because I actually live in Oxford now, and it was a 1-1 draw. Paul Wilkinson scored a last-minute equaliser, and it was the season Everton won the league. So I started covering this, so he blamed me for the decline, and only one trophy since.
No, I think we might talk about where the decline started, but I mean, obviously they were the halcyon days for Everton. But did you cover around when Everton got the title, or was
Obviously at the time, I mean, Everton and Liverpool were two great sides. Liverpool had won the double the season before. Everton then responded by winning the league that followed that season. It was a great side, full of great players, great characters as well. You know, you think of people like Pat Van den Houw and just all of them, but top class players first and foremost.
And obviously you've covered them into the Premier League area. How have you seen things change over the years? You know, with Everton in terms of starting in '87, going into the Premier League, and where they are now.
I think Howard leaving was a big thing, and you look back on the job that Colin did now, and you realise he did a good job. You know, he inherited a team that was maybe just on the decline, and for 2 or 3 seasons, I thought, you look back now and think Colin did really well. But then after that, the club lost their way a bit. 1 or 2 of the managerial appointments weren't great. You think of Mike Walker, who came to Everton with a huge reputation for what he'd done at Norwich City. And really, unfortunately for Mike, nice fella, but you could almost see right away he didn't realise just how big the club was that he'd taken on. And then, they just haven't quite got it right. There was that period of success under Joe, but they always seem to struggle to get the right manager in. I thought Walter Smith, I really like Walter Smith as a manager and as a person. He worked under very difficult circumstances, which maybe people didn't quite realise at the time just how hard he was working to keep it all ticking over. Then, of course, went into the stability of the David Moyes era and finishing 5, 6 in the top 10 a lot of seasons. But since then, after 1 season of Roberto Martinez, which was very good, good football, finished 5th, really maybe should have finished 4th that season. It's just been instability from that day forward, and the instability started really, I suppose, when Farhad Moshiri brought into the club, because Everton, I beg your pardon, was the model of stability. Since then, managerial change all the time, lots of money to spend, which they didn't have before, and lots of that money squandered, unfortunately.
Yeah, but coming up to 7 years so far at Moshiri, as you mentioned there before, well, certainly when David Moyes was in charge, the club was seen as the model. You know, we look around at the moment and we talked about the likes of Brentford and Brighton and how well they're doing. People point the finger, but for many years it was Everton who was seen as that. Do you think Farhad Moshiri coming in was when it all started to fall into bits, or had there been signs before that the club was on shaky ground and it was actually David Moyes holding it together?
I think it's interesting that in Roberto Martinez's first season, I think he was able to bring in his own style of play, but there was a lot of the David Moyes style and the character in that side. You know, people like Sylvain Distin, who was a top-class centre-half. You know, people like Stephen Pienaar was there. You had Phil Jagielka, all those people, Leighton Baines from the David Moyes era. He added 2 or 3. You talk about James McCarthy, Gareth Barry, Romelu Lukaku being the big signing. But I felt the longer Roberto was there, the worse the team was getting. They were leaking goals in a way they'd never done before. And I think it was in his final season, it was the worst home record in league history for Everton. So it maybe started to go wrong then. Moshiri arrived, and I think for all the criticism Moshiri receives, and lots of it is justified, I don't think you could accuse him of lacking ambition or determination to put his hand in his pocket, which was what Everton wanted when they were looking for this billionaire. It's just been the decision-making that has been bad. You can't fault his ambition, you can't fault his willingness to spend to try and achieve his goals. It's just that so much of the decision-making around managers and signings and appointments of director of football have just been poor.
Do you think, you mentioned that, do you think that there's been a lot of mixed messages of who was in charge and who's running. Obviously, he brought a director of football system in that we're on to the third one now. Do you think from the off it was doomed because there's not one person making those decisions? You know, some guy, I think he sacked 7 managers now onto his 8th manager. And
I think the director of football system is fine, but I think that one of his first mistakes was he got that the wrong way around. He appointed Ronald Koeman as manager, and Ronald Koeman is a very, very strong-minded, strong-willed individual. And it may be difficult to work with, but difficult in that he wants things done in a certain way. To bring in Steve Walsh afterwards was in my opinion, the wrong way round. You should have got the director of football in first. He could have maybe attracted a big name then because it was new, the money was there. Whether they would have wanted Ronald Koeman as the manager, who knows? But I just think they got it the wrong way round. Steve Walsh was not a director of football at Leicester City. He was a scout, and he'd scouted brilliantly at Leicester, bringing in people like Kante and Mahrez, people like that. He wasn't a director of football. So that partnership, I felt, was doomed from the start. I think it played a part in the season where they ended with 3 number 10s. They signed Davy Klaassen, who you have to say would have Ronald's fingerprints all over that one. Wayne Rooney came back, then Gylfi Sigurdsson came. So there was a lack of a structure and strategy even then. And then when he made the changes and Marco Silva came in, even then, Marco Silva and Marcel Brands came together on the same day, but they were not a pair. It wasn't like Marcel Brands had picked Marco Silva because we knew from months before that Moshiri was obsessed with the idea of someone he thought was a mini Mourinho type figure. But by all accounts, they formed a very good working relationship. And Marcel Brands was one of the people who on that final day when Moshiri wanted to sack Silva, Marcel Brands was in his corner fighting for him, but Moshiri made the decision. Then the managers that followed, Carlo Ancelotti, Rafa Benitez, there's no way on earth Marcel Brands would have chosen those two people as his manager. Not to say, they both had their qualities. Obviously the latter one, Rafa, it just wasn't acceptable to so many Everton fans. But they were just not his type of manager. If you'd have said to Marcel Brands, who would you just give us a list of who you'd want as manager? You wouldn't have thought Carlo Ancelotti would have been on it. This experienced man who'd want to do things his own way, and then Rafa Benitez, this experienced man who absolutely, definitely wants to do things his own way. So I just think the system has been dysfunctional from the start.
Do you think? Because I remember that day. Because I think I was literally sitting here all day waiting for Marco Silva to be sacked. But it was Brands who was fighting his corner.
It was
all
about
day.
7 o'clock at night.
Yeah, I was literally waiting all day for the news to break. Do you think that, in terms of where Everton are right now, the appointment of Carlo Ancelotti might have been even though while he was here, the results were fine, and he sort of pushed Everton to a next level, bringing in people like James Rodriguez. Do you think that's where they took the real wrong turn? Like everything before that felt like it was redeemable. We bought a lot of bad players and we still had them on the books, but to me, I felt like when they brought Carlo in, they set a standard that was just far too high for the football club, and it meant you'd have to go and get someone like James Rodriguez to keep him happy on ridiculous wages, where maybe at that point with FFP really looking, or certainly the Premier League rules starting to look like they were starting to be imposed, that someone maybe like David Moyes, who could have dragged the club back to the level it should have been on and the right track. And that's maybe where it started to go wrong.
Well, David Moyes effectively had the job. He actually had the job, more or less, until Napoli decided to sack Carlo Ancelotti on a Wednesday night after he got them into the Champions League knockout phase. And I suspect what happened was that Moyes was getting the job, and then Moshiri saw that Carlo Ancelotti was available. Why can't we get him? And in some ways, I find it very difficult to criticise him for that.
Yeah.
Because I know at the time, all the Everton fans couldn't believe that they got Carlo Ancelotti as the manager, one of the most decorated managers in world football. And there was lots of stuff like, well, is he the type of manager for Everton? Because really what he was and what he is a facilitator of great players. He doesn't go in and build teams from the ground up. That wasn't his thing. So the theory was maybe that Everton, rather than him having to become more like Everton had to become more like him. Yeah. So you get the players who came in like Alan, and obviously Rodriguez was the big high-profile signing. And I think now probably if Carlo Ancelotti had started his second season at Everton, he probably would have been sacked in a few weeks because they'd started to maybe go a little bit wrong the previous season. But I would be very low to criticise Moshiri for getting Carlo Ancelotti because, he wanted to be ambitious. And, at the time, I don't know many Everton fans who said, I'd rather we'd had David Moyes ahead of Carlo Ancelotti. So by saying that now, I think you're probably being it's a bit wise after the event to say.
Yeah.
But what you're saying after what has happened since actually makes sense.
Yeah. No, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I remember when Carlo Ancelotti was announced, and it was around the fan base was, we'll wait and see. I don't think when he was announced there was this euphoria of like, that means we're going to get into the Champions League. A lot of people, like you've just said, were like, can he do the job we really need? But I think in terms of where we are as a football club, I sit here, I'm just a fan. I don't know what goes on in the boardroom. Those people do, and those people should be making those decisions with the evidence they're given. And obviously what we've seen since then, and where things have started to go wrong is FFP, is obviously the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. Everton have clearly are right up against it, and for me that decision was almost like the catalyst. And I know you can say that in hindsight, but surely someone at the football club should understand that.
I agree with that. But again, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you look back now and you think, well, maybe David Moyes would have been a better choice than Carlo Ancelotti. But on the other side of that, people are thinking, well, if you got Carlo Ancelotti, he can attract these players. He'd won at that time 3 Champions Leagues, now 4. And he did in that one season he was there. He had some great results, particularly away. He just couldn't get results at home, could he? And of course, it was he made a decent start. Then the lockdown came, so the games were behind closed doors, and it was all a bit, iffy. But then at the start of the following season, you look at the teams Everton beat away from home in that season. Liverpool, Spurs, Arsenal, people like that got points at Man United. A lot of it was good. It was the home form that did for them. You wonder whether the fact, a bit like Liverpool really, the fact that the fans weren't there affected that home form. If Everton had anything like home form to match their away form, they would have gotten to Europe under Carlo.
He just seemed to get bored, I think, towards the end. He just looked like, especially like, I think the likes of Sheffield United and Fulham, where they were, to get into Europe, he just seemed like a little bit bored.
Maybe he was, but he was always that type of figure, wasn't he? He wasn't like he wasn't the most emotional on the touchline. But he invested in the club and he invested in the area.
He was a great fella.
He loved Crosby, didn't he? And living around there. The problem Everton had was that out of the blue, I'm not sure whether Real Madrid could get who they actually wanted at the time. And so they thought, well, they'll turn to Carlo as a little bit of a holding operation. And the holding operation won them La Liga and the Champions League. So that one came out of the blue. Again, Fard Moshiri can cop plenty of flack, but I think that one was a bit of a stunner for him, really.
And obviously we've had Rafa Benitez ever since. I mean, did you ever think that was ever going to work?
Well, you know what? I was probably one of the few people, and you count them on the fingers of one hand. He was experienced. He'd been successful. He's worked at various clubs like Newcastle. But he was always going to be judged to different standards to everybody else. When he lost a game, when he made a substitution, there was always going to be this undercurrent of criticism. He actually made a very good start, but then there were 2 or 3 quite serious injuries to the likes of Calvert-Lewin, Richarlison, Doucouré, which sort of undermined him. And by the end, it was unsustainable, unfortunately. And what slightly disappointed me about him was that if somebody said to me, what do you think a Rafa Benitez team would look like? I would say, well, they'd be well organised, they won't concede a lot of goals, they won't concede stupid goals from set pieces. They just look like even if they didn't win every game, they'd look like they knew what they were about and what they were doing. And he never seemed to quite get that. Whether he was trying to do something different because it was Everton, I don't know. But what I will say about him is, and people that tend not to listen to the positive things that you say about him, the people he brought in on little or no money, Andros Townsend was a decent signing until he got a bad injury. Damari Gray is still probably one of Everton's more potent players. I don't think you'd look back now and say getting rid of Luca Dean was a massive error because of what he's done since and the way he played for Everton for quite a while before that. And with that money, he brought in 2 decent fullbacks in Mikalenko and Nathan Patterson. So that side of thing I think is a positive. But having thought about it since, and as one of the few people who thought it mightn't be too bad, it was never going to work and it was a bad decision. But I at the start, I thought, well, I can maybe see that.
I think, I could actually, because I thought the way I looked at it was, and I actually said it, so people know I said it, is it was almost like they were safeguarding the next 3 years for when the stadium would be being built. It was like, let's just get a couple of, 10th place finishes, we'll be all right, not exciting, and then get in that new stadium, and then things will start to take off.
They went into such a terrible run, didn't they? And they were losing games. They lost at home to Brighton, I think, which was a bad result. The Watford one was a killer because they were 2-1 up with 12 minutes to go, and they lose 5-2. And then, of course, they play Norwich, who couldn't beat anybody, and they're two goals down after about 15 minutes. Yeah. The crowd have turned, and again, you'd reach that point, a bit like with Frank Lampard and West Ham. You reach that point where there's no going back, really.
There was a lot of symmetry in the two actually getting sacked, because obviously Lampard and Rafa Benitez got draws away that no one ever seen coming. Chelsea for Rafa, and obviously Man City. And then they lost the next game. Both lost the next game to Brighton, and then both lost the next game to teams bottom of the league.
I think with Frank, after the World Cup, you looked and thought, right, 3 home games coming up now. Wolves, Brighton, Southampton. You've got to be thinking, at the very minimum 6, maybe 7 points, and as the dream, 9. Because you're playing 2 teams, Wolves, Southampton, who are struggling. Brighton, who are a very good side. But to get none was a catastrophe, really, particularly in Southampton. Their manager gets sacked. The only league game he won in his whole time at the club was away at Everton. So,
do you think, after everything that's happened with the board, and we'll come on to that in a moment, but do you think a stronger board, a board that hadn't sacked as many managers as they had, may have sacked Frank Lampard after the 2 Bournemouth defeats, with that long break for the World Cup, like other clubs have? Obviously, Aston Villa look like they've benefited from that. Southampton, obviously not so. But do you think that maybe in hindsight should have been the moment? Everton?
Possibly. You look back and think maybe they should have done it then. Clubs used to do it at the international break, didn't they? We've got a couple of weeks. But the problem with this board is they could have done it, but would they have had anybody ready to come in? You know, there doesn't seem to be any sort of clear plan. I mean, we ended up with Everton's board deciding between Marcelo Bielsa and Sean Dyche. And, you know, you couldn't ask for 2 more diametrically opposed managers in characters, in styles, than Bielsa and Sean Dyche. That, to me, showed there was no clear thinking, or one part of the board, the owner maybe, was thinking was thinking Bielsa. Another part was thinking someone like Dyche, or maybe Corberan, or somebody like that. But you look back again, it's with hindsight, isn't it? And you think, oh, maybe they should have done it then and given themselves, I mean, if they wanted Bielsa could have had 5 weeks to bed people in, couldn't he? Because he's not one of these people who wants to walk straight in and take over a club. And this is no reflection on him. I personally, if Everton had appointed Marcelo Bielsa, they would have been guaranteed relegation.
Yeah, I think so.
Because he just wouldn't have had any time to impose himself on the club. And you suspect he probably knew that as well, which is why he said, well, okay, I'll take the under-21 to the end of the season, which is never going to be allowed. Yeah. But in the end, I think they've appointed a manager who's a really good manager, and Everton's chances of staying up have improved with the appointments of Sean Dyche. I've got no doubt about that.
So obviously January was just absolutely chaotic for, I mean, I know for what we do, it just didn't stop. Every day was a different story. The manager, obviously, situation with trying to bring in new players, and obviously the board itself, the fans obviously turned, more after the Brighton game, leading up to the Southampton game. What did you make of some of the things that have come out over the month? Obviously, the Southampton game, the fans having a sit-in, and then before the game, there was allegations of the CEO being assaulted, and just created this weird situation where, obviously, since then, the club have sort of said they want to leave that in the past and haven't gone to the police about it.
I think it created mistrust. If the board have said they've had these threats, and if there's the incidents with the chief executive, then you have to believe them. You have to believe them. But there's no doubt it created a mistrust, and the fact that the board of directors felt unable to go to the game, and then unable to go to the first manager's first home game, first game, I'm not sure how you find a way back from that. Yeah, I really don't. I mean, I don't know under what circumstances now they will go back. Because it's quite a look, isn't it, for the manager's first home game in charge, and the board of directors aren't there. I just think it's been building up for a while. I think the running of the club has been so dysfunctional in terms of strategy, in terms of structure, the coming and going of managers. the signing of players, the waste of cash. And I think the problem that lots of people have is that the board, they've had this strategic review, but they've ended up in exactly the same place they were when they started the strategic review. So what were they reviewing? One of the things was recruitment, supposedly under the terms of the strategic review. January's just gone past and they've recruited nobody.
Yeah.
So what were they working on? What has the strategic review done to improve things at Everton? Because you look at the situation now, and they're in exactly the same situation, possibly even worse than when the strategic review started. I think the relationship between the board and the fans is badly broken, and I'm not quite sure what can be said or done to repair it.
So obviously there's a out there's a lot of different idea of whose fault it is, depending on, I suppose, who the person speaking is, whose camp they're in. But you know, a lot of people put it down to Farhad Moshiri, but then a lot of people put it on the board, and obviously the fans themselves have singled out every single member. You know, how do you see that?
I think they're all responsible.
Yeah.
I think the owner has to be chiefly responsible because he is the owner. But the board are there. If they have no power, if it's all Farhad Moshiri saying, you know, I want you to do this, why are they there? And if the things that have gone on, excuse me, that they disagreed with, then, you know, some people might have resigned on a matter of principle, mightn't they?
Yeah.
So I think they all hold responsibility for everything that has gone on, not just the owner, who undoubtedly, I think, shows a real lack of awareness of football and how to run a football club. Although, as I've said before, the stadium is coming up, looks fantastic. He's put his hand in his pocket. He's been very ambitious, almost over ambitious. If you go back to what you said about Carlo Ancelotti. But they're all responsible for it. You know, the people who run the club are responsible for the position they're in, and this position has been a poor one for a very long while. I think what maybe grates with Everton fans is when they hear Bill Kenwright saying other clubs revere the board, and if they have a problem, they think, what would the Everton board do? And the Everton fans look at what the Everton board have done. And say, well, if you're running a football club properly, you wouldn't do that. Yeah. So it's stuff like that grates with them, I think.
Yeah, it's we've heard some great sound bites over the years from the likes of Bill Kenwright. What do you think they can do next then? Because obviously they've brought the manager in. They can't sign any players now anyway. You know, it's day-to-day business now. What do you think they should be doing? Because obviously it's a four-man board. It's got Grant Ingles on, Graham Sharp, who, you know, a lot of people question why he's, you know, you mentioned there about possible resignations. I mean, he's someone who I certainly look at and think, why are you putting up with this? You are a great of this football club. So what do you think they can do next? Because there's obviously a lot of talk about investments coming from America, possibly helping finish off the stadium, maybe places on the board. So
I think what they have to do now is hope that the manager they have appointed wins enough games to keep them in the Premier League. I think it's as simple as that now. I think that's it. As you said, they can't buy anyone. What they've got is what they've got. And they're now relying on the manager, who's got great experience and is very talented, to keep them up. If in the meantime Moshiri can attract investment or a buyer, then I think he would probably accept that. Because obviously he's become an unpopular figure with the fans. But I think base camp now is Sean Dyche winning enough matches to keep Everton in the Premier League. And as I said to you, I think Everton's chances of staying in the Premier League are much better with him than they were before, because he's not quite what he may seem, Sean Dyche. Because I was invited 3 or 4 years ago to St George's Park to cover the UEFA A licences being taken. And I went on the basis that some of it was reportable, other parts of it you could watch it, but you couldn't report on it. In the afternoon, there was a seminar on leadership and coaching, and it was given by Sean Dyche, and he was absolutely fantastic. The way he spoke about his style, how he works with his backroom staff, you know, the way he goes about his job. It was absolutely top class. You went away from that thinking I could play for him, because he had a real handle on what he was doing. In some ways, people insult him by saying, well, you know, his methods are simple and stuff, which maybe they are. But honestly, he spoke with great intelligence, great humour and great knowledge. And if I was an Everton fan and I could get a hold of a video and show them that, which you can't because it was a sort of behind closed doors thing, I think you'd watch it and come away thinking we've got a chance under this guy, because there's a lot more to him than meets the eye, I think.
Yeah, I think we've seen that already with I've watched all the podcasts he's done and listened to him, and he obviously listens to a lot of people, not just in football, outside football. And there's obviously been reported that he's brought in the likes of Peter Reid, and he's looking to bring in Eddie Jones and people like that just to talk. And I think, I find that all very, very, very interesting. But just to finish off, I mean, obviously the fans are still really unhappy, and they're going to continue with protests over the coming weeks, I imagine. Do you think maybe the best way the board can help is just by staying away, and as you said, let Sean Dyche concentrate on the football, let the Everton fans concentrate on the football, and then not be a distraction by actually being around and creating an extra story?
I think that is a very good point. We saw against Arsenal that the fans held a very peaceful demonstration before the game, where they marched up to Goodison Park. As I said, it was very peaceful, pretty much as it was, I think, at Southampton. I wasn't there, but everyone said to me it was very peaceful off the pitch. And maybe you're right, maybe you've got a point, maybe they should stay away and just let everybody just get on with it and assess the situation maybe at the end of the season, hopefully for Everton's sake, with Premier League safety assured. But there's no doubt it would be a distraction now, because they've missed a couple of games, so when they come back the cameras would be on them, the fans would be attracted to them, if you like. So maybe that is a fair point. Maybe it would be a good idea for them to stay away and just consider how this situation can be improved, whether it's by, Mashiri selling up, whether it's by somebody resigning, more than one person resigning. I don't know, but that is a fair, I would say, a fair thing to suggest, that maybe don't have any distractions other than the team and then the fans, who can have their protests peacefully and do what they did against Arsenal, which was do all that protest peaceful, and then, I mean, I wasn't there, but I've heard that the atmosphere inside the ground was absolutely fantastic. And I think, from what I gather, against Southampton, the fans were behind the team. It wasn't like, they did the protest before, they did the sit-in afterwards. But while the game was on, Everton fans focused totally on supporting the team.
And that was what was actually strange about something that was said in Sean Dyche's first press conference. He mentioned the fans, and it was, again, because it's about communication, and I think it's something, certainly as a fan and doing this, I've always struggled with Everton's communication. And before that game, when he done his press conference, he mentioned about the fans not being with them, and I found that very, very strange. And I'm glad Alan Stubbs actually picked it up when he was asked about it in the TV coverage. He said that these fans will give you everything, and he said I found that strange as well.
Well, if you remember last season, I think after Jordan Pickford and Richarlison, the people who kept Everton in the Premier League were the fans. The fans almost decided at one point last season, we're going down unless we do something about it. And the support Everton received last season towards the end, considering the situation they were in and considering some of the dross that had been served up, was unbelievable. They played as much of a part as 80% of that playing squad in keeping Everton in the Premier League last season. And, for all the efforts and I picked out two players there who were absolutely fantastic in helping Everton stay up. The thing that really galvanised the club, and obviously in turn galvanised the players, was the way those fans supported the team. And again, as I say, I wasn't at the Arsenal game, but people who were there have told me that beforehand, peaceful protests made their point about the board, but during the game it was full on total support, helped by a new manager arriving, of course, and Arsenal not scoring 4 goals in the first 5 minutes. But the support was absolutely full on for the team, and maybe, to go back to your point, that would work as a sort of, if the board just stay away and there isn't a distraction. But that's a decision for them.
Yeah, that's why I find what happened on the Southampton game so baffling to me. I mean, it's a thing for me personally that I don't think the board can ever come back from. I mean, it's not what they said, it's how they said it and the timing of it. And again, I talk about communication all the time and the lack of it. But let me just ask you one thing before I leave you. I mean, you talk about the board not coming back. Were you around when Peter Johnson came back after selling Duncan Ferguson?
I was.
He was the last one who was sort of exiled, wasn't he?
Yeah. Did he stay away after that? I can't remember.
He did. He stayed away.
To remind me.
He stayed away for a while and then he came back.
Did he?
Yeah.
So I don't remember him. I remember the Peter Johnson. I mean, again, Peter Johnson's somebody who, I was critical of him when I was at the Echo, but in many ways his intentions were good. You know, Peter Johnson. I know he had all this Agent Johnson thing, and but when he first arrived, he tried to spend money, bring players to the club. He appointed Joe Roy, which worked for a while. They won a trophy, but then it just went pear-shaped for him. And a little bit like Rafa, I suppose, in some ways. People started doing this Agent Johnson business. But his intentions were good. And I'm sure when Farhad Moshiri bought into Everton, his intentions were good. He wanted to back them with big money. He wanted to be ambitious. He wanted to have this Hollywood-style manager, didn't he? And Koeman was the start of that, if you like. His intentions were good. It's just that the decision-making has been very poor. And he takes his share of responsibility, but the board of directors, that is what they are. They are directors. And the way the club has functioned, judging by results, judging by the money spent on transfers, judging by the turnover of managers, you are not looking at a club that is stable and well run at the moment, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah. Let's leave it there, Phil. Fantastic to have you on the show. You can find Phil over on the BBC website covering all the big games. Whenever there's a big game, Phil will be there. There you go. Check out Phil's stuff there. Thanks for watching Toffee TV, and we'll see you later.